I'm Amy Zaley with the Jerusalem Connection Red Alert Report for June 23rd. Are you calling God a liar? Sorry to jar you, but sometimes we have to ask ourselves these questions to understand if we are understanding God's Word correctly. And I know it's jarring. As anti-Semitism grows, not only has COVID fueled it, now the race wars seem to have mainstreamed elements that are falsely vilifying Jews and Israel for oppressed groups worldwide. As we discussed last week in our report about the term intersectionality. But let's look at another term that's letting Christians fall victim to a hate and even, dare I say it, an accusation that God might be a liar. It is the idea of replacement theology. Those who follow or practice it don't even know this term. We also see the term Supersessonalism assigned to this kind of theology. But what is it? It is a cancer that started in the early church in Europe when Gentile Christians, and in the Middle East, when Gentile Christians were aligning themselves with state rulers and political powers, among other reasons. Something called amillennialism was thought out in theological circles, and it is the backbone of what many mainstream Western denominations use as their theology. And it sought to take out the covenants, the promises God had made to Israel, and say that they are for the Gentile church ever since the Messiah came 2,000 years ago. This does two things. It makes those who adhere to it, in my humble opinion, not only thieves, but calling God a liar. If God made unconditional promises to Abraham and his descendants, who are we to say, no, that's our promise? Or claim the whole thing was just an allegory, which is also a popular theological practice among replacement theologists. Now, not all theologians over the course of centuries actually agreed with this. Those apparently Zionist Christians who saw God's promise for Israel and the Jews as a destiny was not to be taken away from them or seen as allegorical, and that the Gentile Christians have a different destiny, all leading up to the same point in history when Messiah comes again. For a really good overview of this topic in 2 hours, which is amazing, go to YouTube and search for Chuck Missler, Missler, Chuck Missler's series, Israel and the Church. It's a 2-session series published in November 2014. He has since passed away, but it is so valuable. Even this 2 hours doesn't give it justification to it all, but he gives you plenty of information and resources and encourage you to find these topics out for yourself. Now, how does Chuck Missler define replacement theology? He calls it a myth. He calls it a heresy. He said replacement theology is a non-biblical outgrowth of anti-Semitism in the early church that denies God's place, denies Israel God's place in his redemptive program for all of history. And today it is a part of mainstream denominations to the point where the latest Danish translation of the Bible actually removed the term Israel from the text. And at it were the roots of anti-Semitism that were so deeply ingrained in Europe that you can find sermons from preachers and pastors and writings with the most vile and hatred things said about Jewish people. You'd be so shocked at this language that it came out of a Christian writer. And yet these notions so permeated the entire continent that it was practically complicit in the systemic genocide of a people by the 20th century. We know that as the Holocaust. Neighbors being hauled away, men, women, children, pulled from their homes to their extermination, their possessions looted. Think about it. You see how all angry and upset we get when we see videotape footage from cell phones for 30 seconds of men being subdued by officers with questionable origins. What would you say to your neighbor if you saw a Gestapo-like officer hauling them out of their homes, looting their property, smashing their small children on pavement? What would you do? The point is, We have God's covenant in the Old Testament, and it is unconditional, and it makes promises to Abraham and his descendants, the Israelites, or the nation of Israel. This discussion about Israel takes up nearly 5/6 of the entire Bible. The New Testament, with earnest study, does not negate any of it, but indeed supports it and calls upon it in its ministries and the writings. The Abrahamic covenant is the promises to Abraham and his descendants who become Israel. The covenant of the land, well, that's about the actual real estate. The Davidic covenant is about the kingdom, the Messiah, the lines through which the Messiah will come and rest, and the rest will come through the history that has passed and the rest of history that has yet to unfold until his return. And we seek all to remove this via anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, a demonic spirit that seeks to undercut these very divine promises. It is so good and evil at its core. The Abrahamic covenant, the idea of a chosen people, an enduring people whose descendants will permeate the world and be a blessing to it, including the Messiah, this is being destroyed and attacked by just about everyone. The UN, chanting crowds in Paris, chanting crowds in New York City, hate groups in Canada, hate groups in LA, institutions, either internationally or regionally, groups or individuals, they are attacking the very people. Anti-Semitism is at the core of this, and it even includes the church, world rulers, and more. The anti-Semitism of the Western Church is palpable and has been overt since the 3rd century, like I just explained, and the Holocaust of the 20th century was ushered in by this atmosphere. Today we have the UN constantly condemning a people and other leaders as well, and churches usurping the covenant from their very pulpits. Let's look at the land covenant. How is that being attacked? Well, we see this every day. The Muslims in the Middle East, Arab and Persian, all deny Israel the right to exist. In general, the land is a constant drumbeat that the Jews cannot be there in the land. There's not one of them can be there. The country cannot be there. There is a hatred to the death of Jewish people. It is a bloodlust to remove them and Israel from the map. And now it is becoming a global cause. That Israel is somehow delegitimate, colonizing, imperialistic, etc. What's the Davidic covenant and how is that being attacked? Well, let's go back to the church. The Messiah from the Jews we cannot dismiss from the study of Israel as well. The Jewish people are part of all of history, pre-first coming, the time between the first and second coming, and the second coming and beyond. And yet replacement theology dictates that the Davidic covenant has been destroyed, and the Gentile church at the dawn of what men labeled the New Testament took it over. They stole the birthright. It is thievery. It is malpractice for preachers and seminaries, and it is anti-Semitic to be telling us that God is a liar and we don't want to do that. I'm oversimplifying these things by great magnitude in order to bring it to you in a very short message. But it deserves a lifetime of study. But my point is, find out for yourself. Read the Bible with original eyes, not by what people are telling you. Use your Google to translate words. Look up verses in the original text. There are so many websites out there for free that'll let you do this. How is the word meant to be? What's the symbol of it, ism of it in context from the culture? See how the Old Testament is quoted over and over again in the New, and it wasn't to replace it, it was to illustrate its fulfillment. Remember, the gospel was to the Jew first and also to the Gentile. Israel's role did not disappear 2,000 years ago at the cross. That is not in the text anywhere, but you need to see it for yourself. Many an earnest Christian with insights on a great many spiritual and theological matters, both past and some present, have fallen into this snare of anti-Semitism and skewed biblical reading. But it is not an excuse anymore. Too much information is available at our fingertips within a few clicks that we can find the truth for ourselves. Shavua Tov, and have a great week.